Hello, my name is Hani Esther Indictor Portner, and you are listening to Passing the Paintbrush, a queer Jewish podcast and workshop series focusing on queer Jewish artists who worked, lived, and loved in Berlin Mitte. In this episode, we will take some time to learn about Toni Ebel, the draftswoman, portrait artist, and painter who in her later life created socialist realism works in the DDR. Through her art, she was able to transition and make a living surviving in exile during the Shoah. Toni Ebel, like many trans people in her situation, applied for her name to be changed to a different name, Annie, but was denied due to this name not being on the list of approved names for trans people. In this documentary, I will be using the name Toni Ebel because she signed her paintings, did interviews, and exhibited her work under this name later in her life. But her previous attempt to change her name to Annie shouldn't be dismissed. As we know, Annie was a name she connected to and identified with, at least at a certain point in time. A content note. In this episode, listeners should be aware that the following topics will be talked about that may be triggering or difficult to listen to, such as anti-Semitism, transmisogyny, homophobia, dysphoria, anxiety, eugenics, colonialism, insurgents who were Nazis. There will be mentions of cultural appropriation in queer spaces, the clinical gaze and pathologization and fetishization of trans bodies in popular culture and media, and gatekeeping via medical examinations and interviews. We will be discussing acts of war and resulting injuries, the Shoah, domestic and gender-based violence, exile, destruction of books and art, police violence and imprisonment, forced intoxication, involuntary commitment to hospitals, suicide, illness, death, murder, and naming specific concentration camps and the fates of those who did not survive. Please take care while listening. The idea for this whole project began because of my desire to learn more and educate others about queer and trans Jewish artists like Toni Ebel. She's the least well-known, with only 193 hits on Google as of publishing. I was introduced to her story by Raymond Wolfert in January of 2023 because I was making an audio documentary on the Magnus Hirschfeld Institute.
My name is Raymond Wolfert. I live here in Berlin and I'm a co-worker at the Magnus Hirschfeld Society. I think I started to work with the others in this organization for about 15 or maybe 20 years ago. I wasn't born in Berlin, but I came to Berlin in about 1989. I'm from the former Bundesrepublik Deutschland, so West Germany. And the reason why I came here maybe is that I studied the Scandinavian languages when I was younger, and after having made my degree in Scandinavian literature and languages and so on, I wanted to concentrate on the intellectual bridges or the cultural bridges between Scandinavia and Germany. So I was interested in finding out more about, connections between the homophile emancipation movement that started here in Germany, but that, yes, was very successful in Denmark, Norway, and Sweden. And I just wanted to find ancestors, cultural ancestors that could combine both my German home country by birth and my other home country, that is Norway, where I studied when I was about 25 years old or 20 years old. And I wanted to, find something that combines both worlds. And that's why I try to dig into history and try to find people or publications that show that there has been a connection between Germany and the Scandinavian languages long time before I was born. I experience my work here as a kind of learning process. It's so interesting to go back into history and find out what I personally, when I grew up as a boy or as a young man, what I didn't know, what I wasn't taught. But there are so many things in life that already have existed, and it's necessary and it's very interesting to rediscover things. So I don't remember the date, but I got acquainted with Jens Dobler, who was a fast member of this organization. We became friends a couple of years ago, I would say maybe around 2005. And at that point of time, I think I was writing an article about Herman Bang, a Danish homosexual writer who was called to be the Danish Oscar Wilde, and I felt a bit lonely with doing my research and being the only one who both knew the Scandinavian languages and had the interest for homosexual in history. So I tried to find people who I could share interest with, and Jens, he doesn't speak the Scandinavian languages, but he said to me, well, you're welcome to join us at the Magnus Hirschfeld Society. So we are the group of people who meet here. Everybody has his own area of interest, but we can ask each other, we can talk and we can discuss things, and everybody is welcome to be with us. And I thought and I experienced it as a very good place where I could realize myself, where I could widen my horizon. And at first I didn't know that much about Magnus Hirschfeld, and still today I'm not a Hirschfeld expert. Yeah, so I don't concentrate on Hirschfeld's theories or his lifetime, but I try to find sources that are around, that are combined with his life, but fit more into my personal background. Yeah, so that means there's a huge area of things where you can dig holes and find things, and sometimes I feel like an archaeologist.
Yeah.
And what I find here, for instance, my colleagues at the Magnus Hirschfeld Society have never found before either, because they haven't looked at these places where I look. Yeah. So it's very encouraging and very positive to be in a group and not to work with your special interest just on your own.
Yeah, have a community.
Yes, have a community. And one other theme I'm working with, that is Charlaque, for instance, and Toni, Ebel, of course. So once you write a book about a historical person, you think, well, now everything is said, and it's between page 1 and page 180, so everything is in this book.
Right.
Yeah. But then a couple of years later, research continues, and it grows, and people come with new findings and new aspects that you wouldn't have thought about, and then you think, well, okay, it's not everything that is in that book, but you have to continue and try one more time.
Raymond first learned about Toni Ebel from a 1933 Swedish article that he discovered and translated, which featured Charlotte Charlaque and Toni Ebel and their flat in Schöneberg.
And Ragnar Ahlstedt, he there used only first names. He said, this is about Miss Toni and Mrs. Lola, but no names, no family names are mentioned. And I found this text about Miss Toni and Mrs. Lola. And then I came here at the Magnus Hirschfeld Society, and I showed this article to my colleagues. And Ralph at once, he pointed at the photograph and said, "Oh, this is Toni Ebel." And then I had the family name. Yeah, so Miss Toni was Toni Ebel. So he just pointed on it. We know her. Yes, we know who this is. Yeah. And then I went to the Landesarchiv here in Berlin, where the Restitution Act of Toni lies. And in the Landesarchiv, in this file, there were letters written by a certain Charlotte Charlaque. And I could combine, okay, she must have been Lola. Yeah. And then I could widen my research and could try to find out who was Charlotte Charlaque. Of course, this was not the name she was born with. Her family name had been Charlaque. She was Jewish by birth. She was born into a Jewish German family in Berlin. And the family moved to San Francisco in about 1905 or something like that. And I found sources about this family Charlaque and the brother of Charlotte Charlaque and the father of Charlotte Charlaque. And then I could combine, okay, Charlotte went to the United States together with her family, but at some time or the other, around 1921, she returned to Germany. And then she used the name Lola, and she used the name Charlotte. So I had to combine very tiny elements of sources, and it's like a riddle.
To this day, new undiscovered works of Toni Ebel's are found frequently. It is up to us to search and not forget her name and story. The more she is talked about, the more of her work will appear and be recognized as of significant value artistically and historically. Later, we will hear more about the efforts to research her work and how to help find more paintings. On this journey, I visited many locations in Berlin where Toni Ebel spent important moments of her life and where her paintings now live. I went to the Hirschfeld Institute for Sexual Science in Tiergarten, her home where she lived with her girlfriend Charlotte Charlaque on Nollendorfstrasse, and to Strassburger Platz, where she lived and had a studio after the war. I did not make it to Carlsbad or Prague in the Czech Republic, but they are on my list of places to soon travel. I did travel all the way across the world to the One Archives in Los Angeles at the University of Southern California to read the article where Toni Ebel is mentioned in One magazine. I also visited many spots to do research in Berlin, the Akademie der Kunst reading rooms to look at collected newspaper clippings about her exhibitions and a poster, the Magnus Hirschfeld Gesellschaft and Spinnboden Lesbian Archive to learn more about Ebel's life and the queer and trans scene in Berlin. I went to the Stadtmuseum archives in Spandau, and all the way to the very top of the very hot Ephraim Palace to look at Ebel's pastel self-portrait being restored. I went to Das Minsk in Potsdam, where Toni Ebel's painting was on display this year, and I interviewed and traveled to meet with the many guests you will hear in this piece. I did my best to listen with my whole self and bring you with me as I discovered and learned more about who Toni Ebel was and what she means to us today.
I've lived
Toni Ebel was born the oldest of 11 children on November 10, 1881 in Berlin and raised a Protestant Christian. Her father was a merchant, and after school she had apprentices to be a merchant and a decorator, but these were not completed. When she was 19, she bought a yellow curly wig and clothing with her first paycheck. Upsettingly, these were discovered by her parents and burned. It was not a peaceful scene at home. In 1901, she left and traveled throughout Germany, Austria, and Italy, meeting socialists in Rome and loving the scenery. She was imprisoned under transphobic laws in Palermo for 11 weeks because of how she dressed. In Munich, Ebel attended an art school that was most likely private, as she is not listed in documents of the Munich Academy of Fine Arts. Soon after she began her travels, Ebel met an American older man who became her patron and possibly lover, who sold her paintings and helped her pay her school fees. Together, they traveled to the United States, France, England, Netherlands, and countries in North Africa and Southern Europe. After the American man died in 1903, Toni Ebel continued her travels, returning to Germany in 1908. She lived in Munich and Dresden before returning back to Berlin in 1910. Toni Ebel met her abusive wife Olga Boraleski, 8 years her senior, back in Berlin, and they were married in 1911. Ebel was very unhappy, suffering from domestic violence and attempting suicide multiple times. She was involuntarily committed to a mental hospital for a short while. In 1916, during World War I, Toni Ebel was drafted into the military and went to Champagne, France, where she was buried in a trench and suffered a nervous attack. She was discharged with a pension, having strong anti-military positions for the rest of her life, which are reflected in her art. In 1919, Toni Ebel received a position as a draftswoman in a Berlin electric company, in a way, a different continuation of her career as an artist. In 1920, Ebel joined the SPD and designed posters and participated in discussions, giving speeches. In 1925, after the downturn of the economy, Ebel joined the USPD, or the Independent Social Democratic Party of Germany. In these new circles, Ebel came into contact with artists Heinrich Sill and Käthe Kollwitz. Ebel submitted several works to the Jury-Free Kunstschau Berlin in 1924 and 1925. This organization put on jury-free art shows in Berlin and had 2 board members with familiar names, Käthe Kollwitz and one of Gertrude Sandmann's first teachers, Martin Brandenburg. Toni submitted paintings titled Summer Landscape and Thornpuller, A Rare Guest, Hunting, and Hunting Dog. In the late 1920s, Toni Ebel's wife became very sick with syphilis, and Ebel was her caretaker. During this time, Ebel wore the clothes that she wanted, cooked, did house chores, etc. They lived together in Stieglitz at Fichtestrasse 62. Olga died in January of 1928, and in 1928, Toni Ebel met her friend and lover, Charlaque, who was an actress, singer, dancer, violinist, and who worked as a receptionist and translator at the Magnus Hirschfeld Institute for Sexual Science, which ran from 1919 to 1933 and was established by Magnus Hirschfeld, a queer Jewish doctor. It was created to serve the queer and trans Berlin and international community, participate in research, advocate against anti-gay bills, and help people access birth control, gender-affirming counseling, surgeries, and it served as a social hub, with events hosted in the ballroom/dining area, and precious manuscripts and books available to read in the library. There was even a sex museum and living quarters. In April of 1928, Toni Ebel began working at the Institute as a housemaid, and that spring, she got her Transvestitenschein, or rudimentary trans identification card. Toni Ebel became one of the first trans women in European recorded history to have had gender-affirming surgery, and had her first of a few surgeries in 1929 at 47 years old. She paid for her surgeries with her paintings that were hung at the Institute and sold to doctors, including Hirschfeld.
And at the institute, Toni had so little money that she couldn't pay for her surgery. So she had to pay with paintings. We know that Toni came to the Institute for Sexual Science in about 1929. So it was a year or 2 years before her surgery. Yeah. And at that point of time, she already knew Charlotte, and Charlotte had been here earlier, at the Institute earlier. But I don't really know who introduced whom to Hirschfeld. Charlotte became more or less influential, I would say, because she was a receptionist and she became a translator. So she traveled with Hirschfeld and Carl Giese to London to an annual congress on sexual research. And she translated from the German to the English or the other way around language. And I have the impression that Toni, she had been suffering very, very much.
I spoke with Dr. Brandy Schillace about this time period and her perspectives as a science researcher and author.
My name is Brandy Schillace. I have a PhD. I'm a historian, I'm an author, and I'm a journalist. I have in the past been editor-in-chief of the Medical Humanities Journal for BMJ, which was very focused on social justice. And these days, my pronouns are she, her, but in a non-binary way. I suppose my she, her box is bigger, perhaps, than some.
I asked about the upcoming book, The Intermediaries, a Weimar Story, and her process researching this time period, and about Dora Richter's story and what life was like for trans people who went to the Hirschfeld Institute for support in their transition.
I wanted it to read like an adventure, because it is one, something where you're really invested, and it's not just like, here's a bunch of stuff about science and politics. It's a story that starts in 1886 and it walks its way forward to 1933, asking questions like, how does hate happen? Like, how do we first begin to hate, and why? And why did, at the same time, you have hope happening? So at the Institute, the way Hirschfeld typically, so when someone would come in, they would perform a bunch of analysis, a psychiatric evaluation, et cetera, to make sure that, well, they still do, right? To make sure that this was the proper, proper way forward for you. Mm-hmm. So at that time, there was a physician named Werner Holz who was working at the Institute. I don't think he was there very long, but he was there for a time. And some of it involved measurements. They were very, very keen on measurements because they thought that your physiology had something to do with some of this. So they were measuring like the distance between your iliac bones and things like that. So there was a whole lot of physical measurement as well. So he was performing that, and then he had and Hirschfeld was super fond of questionnaires. Yeah. So it was a quite questionnaire and interview process, which was recorded by someone else. So Dora's speaking. She's not actually writing these things down. Other people are writing them down. And she's giving her first person answers to things. And so the questions are like, what were you like as a child? Talk about your upbringing. When did you first have your first sexual experiences? What was the nature of your relationship? So she gives a very, very comprehensive history of her life up to the point of her going into the clinic when she's in her, I'm afraid of talking out of turn, early 30s, I think. I kind of forget, but she's been an adult for a while, living her life at that point. As a reader, not the writer, of this text, now that it's finished, what I take away from it is just how I feel like we were robbed. Like, if we had started where they were 100 years ago and not had all the awfulness intervening, where we might be today. We're already in a place that seems almost more ahead of where we are now. Imagine 100 years from that. And that's something that Hirschfeld did. They had originally looked forward and thought, wow, the future is so bright. And imagine, I feel so bad. Like, you've got Hirschfeld in the 1920s going, everything's just going to get better and better because no one saw the Nazis coming. And it's just a really, really, that frustrates me, because I think it's sort of like when you look at the future and think, why don't we have flying cars yet? I look at the future, I'm like, why do we not have, like, jet-powered trans people yet. Like, lost all the...
Yeah.
So that's frustrating.
Yeah.
But hopeful note, it's also nice to see, like, when you tell people, when people try to tell you this is like a fad or a phase or a new, you know, and you can be like, no, actually, this is older than electricity, right? Like, this is like, this way things have been always, and it's just that we've made it into a thing. It has become a politicized thing when it used to be a human thing. And much more, and as a result, you know, private and more countenanced in a lot of ways. So it doesn't mean that there wasn't intolerances. There absolutely were, and people were disowned from their families, just like it happens today, and bad things happened, but it wasn't necessarily worse. And that's quite interesting. I guess finally, for me, as someone who is gender fluid and non-binary and feels like, you know, I'll take all the genders things, the fact that, you know, Hirschfeld thought there were thousands and thousands of combinations was really lovely to read and go like, yeah, that tracks.
In 1930, Toni Ebel is mentioned in the famous lesbian magazine Die Freundin as the painter of Magic Flute's lower floor interior, where there will be a planned Easter egg hunt. It is mentioned that Miss Toni was a talented theater painter and repainted the club so that one thinks that they are transported to Japan when they visit. We can assume this meant that Ebel stole and appropriated Japanese art and designs. It is an unfortunate reality that appropriation of Asian art motifs was popular in the Weimar period, and this has added to the legacy of racism and oppression of immigrants in Germany. The bar, Raum der Zauberflöte, at Kommandonstrasse 72, was owned by Lotte Ham, who owned several ventures with Jewish partner Kata Fleischmann. Toni Ebel was friends with fellow maid Dora Richter, and in 1933, Charlotte Charlaque, Toni Ebel, and Dora Richter appeared in the movie Mysterium des Geschlechts.
I found a film in Austria. It's called The Mystery of Sex, or The Mystery of Gender, I don't know. Das Mysterium des Geschlechts. And this film is about, it's a horrible film about the early surgical efforts to help people in transition. And, well, it's a film, a fiction film, and I don't like the story at all. But in this film from 1933, there are, let's say, 20 seconds where you can suddenly see three women in clothes, smiling. Well, this is a film without words. It's a silent movie, of course. And you see these women standing in front of the wall, and they are showing their
Their extravagance, and
yes,
they're blinged out.
Yes, their beauty, their clothes, and then of course they, what's it called, Kette?
Necklaces.
Necklace.
Yeah.
And they are just flirting with the camera. And then cut, and then suddenly you see these three women all naked. And at once I saw these three women, I knew this is Charlotte, this is Toni, and this is Dora. Yeah. So they were the three first female patients at the Institute for Sexual Science. But their names aren't given, so no names are mentioned, and only the person who knows is able to see what this is. Yeah. Well, the atmosphere in these seconds is so special because they are smiling, they seem to be freed from all burdens, they are just happy, and it's just, well, this film was made when the Nazis came to power, yeah. So I don't know how much these women knew about what really was happening in Germany, but I would say Charlotte was aware of the political radicalization and the political change. So she was very clever and observant. Yeah. So I would say she was aware of what had to come, and so far we don't have found any sources where these women say, Well, we had been part in a film. Yeah, so maybe they never found out that the film was shown in Austria. It was never shown in Germany. It was forbidden. Yeah, so and once they had left Germany, the film was shown in Austria, in Vienna, and then maybe they just lost contact with the filmmakers, and they never got to know what happened to these seconds, or which seconds.
Right. Dr. Yona Gade has been a postdoctoral fellow at the University of British Columbia since September. We met to talk during a break at the Queer Contemporary Histories International and Intersectional Perspectives Conference in July at Freie University, where Dr. Gade presented their work researching the film Mysterium des Geschlechts.
My name is Yona Gade, my pronouns are they, them. I'm currently a Dr. des, which means I've finished my PhD, but I haven't published yet, which is this weird German and Swiss academia thing, but yeah. And I'm working on a project. It is about trans history and how it's imagined, especially connecting to German history, or the role that Germany plays within that historical imagination.
I asked them why they are motivated to do this work.
A very personal experience of being trans, living in Vienna at the time, and just wondering how my own subjectivity, my own lived experience kind of related to history and what history's formed, even the possibilities of me existing in that space in that way. And when I started researching, I found this very curious or unexpected to me overlaps between colonial histories and trans histories, and that got me started on working on my dissertation project, which looked at exactly that kind of entanglement between colonial and trans histories, and how we can work on them, think through them, tell them in different ways. And I think that's part maybe also of the answer of why I think researching and teaching those histories is important. And I think all of these histories that you mentioned, they all kind of overlap in different ways. But I think it's so important to find different ways of telling these histories, challenging like a very homonormative, very cisnormative narrative of what the past is, and kind of finding all these like little cracks and breaks in between. Looking in the cracks, I think, is what I'm trying to say. And then the other part is, I think, as someone who also teaches trans history, I think it's still so important for people to learn those histories, especially the ones that also identify as trans. I think it's very important to have like this sense of having a history, however complicated that might be. Yeah, I should mention that I'm not a historian, first of all. I'm more of a cultural studies person, and I also didn't really specifically look into Toni Ebel's story, but she came up in my research in very interesting ways, I think. First in my dissertation research, and then also now in the research that I'm doing, because I looked at this film that's called Mysterium des Geschlechtes, Mystery of Sex, and she, alongside Charlaque and Doa Richter, features in the film. And I find it really curious how this film has been picked up recently. I think it's been in a lot of exhibitions and like public history projects, and there's always this one picture. And we have to think about this film's like from 1933, an Austrian production, very international though in the ways that it was produced, and it has 65 minutes of film reel, but it's always this one still that we pick. And the still, like, I don't want to misrepresent it. I think that still is very powerful because it features these three women embracing each other. There's a lot of joy, a lot of intimacy in that picture. And when I first saw it in the archives, I was so stunned by it and so drawn into, their intimacy that you can really, like, that really reverberates through the screen because they kind of embrace each other. There's a voiceover that's very, like, violent in the way that transfemininity is described, and the camera kind of is a very clinical gaze on their bodies. It's a lot of trans misogyny that I'm not going to repeat, but underneath that, and we cannot hear what they say to each other, but we can see that Charlaque is saying something to the others, and they kind of giggle a little bit, and you can see them relax in front of the camera. So there's this moment in the film, which is a beautiful moment, However, I'm kind of skeptical about the ways that we pick it up and remember it right now. I think in two ways. I think there's this one part where this movie, the way that it's kind of included into, especially like a German queer and trans narration of the past, kind of ignores that it's an Austrian production and also kind of just, I don't know, incorporates queer and trans Austrian history into a German narrative, which I think is problematic. Not to say that, we should center Austrian history at all. That's not what I'm trying to say. But I think there's
Specificity makes it different.
Yeah, I think so. I also think that as much as I'm also not beyond this like longing for this picture or the like feeling so touched by it, I think there is a danger in just picking up this moment of trans joy and friendship and intimacy and ignoring all the rest of the film, which is like a very violent film, as I said. I think it's also in a lot of ways informed by colonial gaze. It also kind of gets lost if we just look at this. And I think it's a very like romanticized idea of looking at the source. And then the other part, and that's what I gave the paper on today, is that I think what's happening in this current moment of how we remember trans history is that it's very much still tethered to the sexological archive. So the way that these women first appear in the film is in the clinic, in the institute, which is, we can assume that it was filmed in the Institute for Sexual Science in Berlin. And that's how, those images kind of enter into the film. So the film is really interesting because it has documentary features and it has fictional, like feature film features. Toni, Ebel and Charlaque and Dora Richter, they are in the documentary part. And then this other part is set in a bar and it's like in the feature film part.
We discuss another trans actress in the film who appears in a bar performing and serves as the counter-narrative to the three trans women at the clinic.
She's really just a spectacle on stage that we can gaze at and stare at, but she could never be part of society, whereas the other three trans women in the film, in the narrative, they are promoted, or not they are promoted, but they are used to promote quote-unquote sex change, which is the medical intervention, as a means to make them into, I think the film pamphlet says something like vibrant members of society. So medicine is kind of portrayed as this kind of saving moment, whereas the other one is on stage and she's just unhappy. She can never be married. She can never be part of this society, which is interesting because when she's on stage, she's singing a song in which she invites the audience into her world of pleasure and joy. So I feel like there's like, is she really unhappy? It doesn't seem like it, but they're really like trying hard to push that narrative.
I asked what they would ask a trans person from the past about.
So many things, really.
Yeah.
I want to know all the gossip, obviously. Interested.
What gossip? Like the best bars or what?
The best bars and like who is who and who's into whom and where are they going, where are they meeting, what are the things that are not in print that we cannot find the traces of. And I think those things, obviously I have like this longing to hear those stories, even though they might not be accessible for us anymore in a lot of ways. I wonder what they made of, like in my research, I really look at how this whole idea of sex change developed in that time period and how it was very much celebrated also by like the broader masses as like this scientific success. And I wonder how people felt about that and like I would love to hear different voices on that, because I think the narratives that we can find in the archives, because of the archives, because the way the archives are structured, are the ones that really found this idea of sex change as a possibility, or like we're really drawn to that, to explore that.
Like how transition is beyond that as well.
Or how trans life in general is beyond the constraints
surgery,
of that.
After moving out of her basement room at the Institute in Tiergarten, Toni Ebel lived at Wollenerstrasse 47 in Mitte, but when her Jewish girlfriend Charlaque came to visit, she was insulted in an anti-Semitic way, so they moved in together at Nollendorfstrasse 24 in Schöneberg, but the harassment continued. It was here that they were visited by Ragnar Alstadt, and he wrote a character piece about trans life and friendship, and their life together in growing times of oppression and fear. From this article, we have the beautiful photo of Toni Ebel and Charlaque holding each other closely and staring at the camera. There is another photo of them and their friends entertaining in their home, and one on the street. In January 1933, the Nazis gained political power, and in March, Toni Ebel voted for the KPD, or the Communist Party. In April, Jewish bans and boycotts started taking effect, and on May 6, 1933, the Institute for Sexual Science was raided, and many precious books, photos, and objects were stolen and burned at Opernplatz on May 10th, including Ebel's paintings. The Institute was symbolic for all the hatred against Jewish people, trans people, queer people, and anyone different or deemed to not be Aryan or German enough. The intertwining of many marginalized communities and the strong coalitions and partnerships that were built made the Institute and what it stood for too much of a threat for the Nazis, and so it was destroyed. There was not even a memorial to the Institute until 1994, the same year that paragraph 175, the law criminalizing homosexuality that Magnus Hirschfeld fought to abolish, was finally eradicated. Amidst the growing anti-Semitism in 1933, Toni Ebel converted to Judaism. It is something that I am very curious about. Where could have Ebel converted in Berlin? I wonder what community was welcoming to her and to Charlaque. So much so that they helped them escape Berlin. When I checked with the Centrum Judaicum, they unfortunately did not have any records about Toni Ebel and where she converted. With the help of their Jewish community and advice from Ebel's sister, Charlaque and Ebel left Berlin in 1934 for what is now the Czech Republic. Toni Ebel used the name Antonia Ebelova in exile. It is likely that Dora Richter also helped them escape, as she was from Bohemia and likely knew the area and journey. In the vacation town of Carlsbad, Ebel painted spa guests and Charlaque tutored. They moved to Prague and got in contact with the emigrant committee of the SPD, but they decided they did not like it there, and so then they moved back to Carlsbad. Charlaque and Ebel were able to survive together for a while this way. In 1936, the couple moved to Brno, where they lived until 1939. Charlotte Charlaque taught languages and was in contact with Karl Giese, Hirschfeld's boyfriend, shortly before he died by suicide. Ebel and Charlaque were not fully welcome in Brno and faced difficulties in frequent searching of their home. They had to say they lived together because Ebel needed a caretaker, and Charlaque served this role. In 1938, Toni Ebel's passport expired, but one of Charlaque's students worked at the German consulate and was able to get her a replacement. In this document, Toni Ebel is listed as a Christian and not Jewish. In 1939, Toni Ebel and Charlotte Charlaque moved back to Prague, where Charlaque made money translating and taught Jewish refugees English and French. Together, Ebel and Charlaque helped people escape and hid Jews in their home. Charlotte Charlaque even said that she hung an American flag outside their door and a sign that said, "Do not disturb." In October of 1941, it became illegal for Jews to emigrate from Germany. Charlotte was out of the country, but she would have to return to Germany in order to escape to America. In March of 1942, Charlotte Charlaque was arrested for being Jewish, and Toni Ebel was able to convince the Swiss consulate that she was a U.S. citizen and was just waiting on her passport from Vienna. Charlaque had Theresienstadt papers already made out for her to be deported, but because of Ebel's fight for her life, Charlaque was able to escape to New York City in July of 1942 on a boat from Lisbon after spending time at the Libenau internment camp in southern Germany.
And they sent her to the southern parts of Germany and said, okay, you have to wait here a couple of weeks. Then we send you to America via Lisboa. And she could escape the European hell, the Nazi hell. And Toni had no chance to leave the area that was controlled by the German authorities. So she had to stay.
In 1943, Ebel finally learned that Charlaque survived the journey and arrived in New York City. Toni Ebel tried to join Charlaque but was not allowed to travel without a sponsor in Lisbon. The United States was also routinely declining boats of refugees. Ebel missed her girlfriend very much. She stayed in Czechoslovakia and was harassed throughout the war by Gestapo until she was interned as a German in May of 1945 for a month, and then she was deported to the border and had to walk 270 kilometers to Cottbus, and from there she took a coal train to Berlin.
Well, there's one letter or one paper where Toni says that she was questioned by a German Gestapo man in Prague before 1945. So after 32 and before 1945. And this person, Toni says that this person had known her from her Steglitz time, from her time living in Germany.
Oh, wow.
So, but of course we don't know how Toni convinced this man that he shouldn't use this against her.
Yeah.
So she was questioned several times by the Gestapo in Prague, but she was never put into a prison house. We don't know why.
Thank goodness.
And then she was expelled from the country by the Czech authorities. So she was sent to the German-Czech border, and from there she had to walk by foot back to Berlin. And she had to leave all her paintings.
Charlotte Charlaque died 20 years later in 1963 in New York City and was known as the Queen of the Brooklyn Promenade. Tragically, the couple never reunited and corresponded until at least 1947. In 2024, Clara Hartman discovered that Charlaque and Ebel's friend Dora Richter had also survived the Shoah and lived until 1966 in Allersberg, Franconia in Bavaria. Charlotte Charlaque is the great-aunt of Ari Wolf. They share their thoughts and questions about the lives of these two women.
Hi, my name is Ari Wolf. I use they/them pronouns. I am graduate student and education coordinator at the LGBTESS office at the Dean of Students office at the University of Oregon. As well as working at the Center for the Prevention of Abuse and Neglect at the University of Oregon as well. I first heard about Charlotte and Toni's love story when Raymond Wolfert reached out to my family and asked for just some information from my family about how we commemorated Charlotte. And my father said, what? We didn't know anything. Charlotte was not remembered in my family at that point. We didn't know anything about Charlotte and Toni's love story. And so I found out through that connection with Raymond. Raymond and I started writing to each other via email and continued writing to each other for about 3 years. And actually now at this point, the last sentence in the book about Charlotte's life is a quote from me, which is incredibly flattering and beautiful as just a way to close the loop. And really bring Charlotte's life back into the life of my family. What questions come up about Charlotte and Toni's story? Of course, to what extent did they stay in touch after the war? Did they want to stay in touch? what was the impact of that war trauma. I feel like we kind of know less and less about them as the years of the war continue. And then my focus in the years immediately after the war is Charlotte, and I think that there's something actually really sad about that. Like, I have some personal loss and feeling like I lose some connection to Toni and to Toni's life. And so I'm wondering if like I can make some repair about that personally, and like bring the two lives back together. I would really actually like to make a journey to Germany and like complete the cycle of repair, and like read my poem about Charlotte's life, and like complete a ritual and bring their two love stories back into one love story, which is what I feel like it still is in so many ways and was always meant to be. I just feel that what happened was so tragic, and so the impact of the war was so deep. And I also think that there was so much courage in Toni saving Charlotte's life, and I think every time I think about that, I feel inspired. And I also think that's a lot of why remembering this history and their love feels so important, is because they did have a decade together that was beautiful and inspiring, and in the midst of like one of the things I've been writing about is like the meaning of apocalypse, right? And that like to them, seeing the end of everything they knew in their Germany be completely changed into this like militarized, horrific, anti-Semitic Nazi Germany must have felt like an apocalypse. And sitting here as I am in the United States facing this election, I can really relate to what that must have felt like. And yet they held strong, and they stayed together for as long as they absolutely humanly could. And they continued to, everywhere they went together, to build and to rebuild. And that also feels really beautiful, that sense of renewal, of like forever renewal. I think there's something really actually innately queer about that. And like I'm taking this class on deviance, and we've been talking about transness, and one of the things we've been talking about is this idea that of like creating spaces in order to survive history, and creating identities that help us survive. And when I think about that, I really think about Charlotte and Toni, like rebuilding their lives, creating spaces in different communities, like creating new professions in a list of different countries, like as they try and stay one step ahead of the Nazis. I mean, that's amazing. When we kind of think about like Nazi survival stories, I think oftentimes we think about these like giant epic tales of survival that are like war resistance stories, and we don't necessarily think about like the people, like the everyday people who were caught up in history, who were artists and writers and lovers, who were fighting back by staying alive and continuing to love each other and building and rebuilding their lives. I think those survival stories are incredibly important to remember. So I and incredibly inspiring. Honestly, I want to share that talking about this still feels really edgy for me. I was raised in a really conservative Jewish context. I'm the only queer member of this generation of my biological family. The way I grew up was believing that I was the only queer member of my biological family. That had a really huge and significant impact on me. And I was often really afraid, like I'm still find myself really afraid on like a nervous system level to draw attention to my queerness. I, for example, and like just started using the men's bathroom like literally last week and feel so much freer and so much happier, and I'm never going back ever. But that's something that took me until literally my 30s to do for myself, and to claim for myself as my identity. And a lot of that just internal fear and belief of needing to like keep my head down, just like not be noticed for my gender identity, pass as cis, pass as a woman, comes from growing up in a situation where it was absolutely not safe to be queer, and it was like very, very dangerous to be perceived as trans. Yeah, I can actually feel that in my body even now as I say that. Like, there was a huge amount of fear that I experienced as of claiming that part of my identity. And it wasn't until the last few years. I mean, I would even say that it wasn't until I started learning about Charlotte that I felt some freedom and some spaciousness around this part of who I am, in spite of being part of the queer community since I was 15 years old. And I think a lot of that is just feeling like I'm not alone. I think about my relationship with Charlotte as a haunting. I think about the idea of a benevolent haunting. I think for a lot of us queer folks, we don't necessarily grow up with any members of our bio family, and some of us don't even have any members of our community who we can look up to as an example of what we want to grow up to be or to become for ourselves. And so we have to find examples in books or, television shows or music or from our ancestors. We have to kind of find stories of who we want to be and then be haunted by those stories so that we feel like we are not alone. And those stories are gifts because they speak into the silences, and they become the company and the comfort that we wouldn't have otherwise. It's almost like having a living, breathing person there with us, to keep us company and keep us safe. And so for me, Charlotte has been one of those very important hauntings in my life, particularly around my trans identity, which has allowed me to really feel safe, to be and to embrace this part of myself. And I mean, I can see this massive and important and transformative difference, and I'm sure that other people can too. And I can see the ways that my life has changed and how much more confidence I have speaking and owning my space and being just taking chances and claiming this person that I want to be in the world. this leader that I want to be in the world. I mean, when I go to like activist events, I think about like femme power and like channeling Charlotte's theatrical performative energy. And when I think about being a facilitator, like that's another kind of way of being on stage. And I also think about channeling Charlotte's energy there. Like, I feel blessed to be with Charlotte. And I also feel the incompleteness and the like needing to like bring Charlotte home to Germany. Like, I feel that very strongly, actually.
You can hear Ari read Charlotte's poem in a special bonus episode coming out soon. Toni Ebel told stories about loss and grief in her still lives. With Eliza Jane Coyle and Raymond Wolfert, we took some time analyzing one particularly intriguing painting.
The glasses that lie there, I have the idea that those are the glasses of Charlotte. This was painted in Prague in about 1942, and we even had a rearrangement. Yes. We had some wine bottles and books and the glasses, or a pair of glasses and a book, and I would like to have this as a living picture in 3D, in three dimensions.
That would be
so,
great.
Yeah. And I think this is nice.
Yeah, I love this one too. I love the composition.
Yeah.
It's at first it's a little simple, but then you look and she painted a painting, which I think that's a fun reference.
Yeah. But what is the book and what is the wine and what is the painting?
Right.
Yeah.
It's very strange to do that.
Why?
Because they're all tools to communicate to people about what the narrative of the picture is.
Yeah.
So it's like usually you show what kind of book it is because it tells you about either where you sit politically or, you know, it tells the viewer something. And it's like all those points, every single point is erased in this still life.
Yeah.
It's so strange.
Yeah.
You don't even know what she's drinking.
No.
Oh.
Why? Yeah.
I have questions.
Yes.
And the books, you don't know. The spines of the books look like they've been taken off.
Yeah.
Like, why don't you know the spines of the books?
So what I would like to have would be a conversation with a person who is able to read pictures, who is able to analyze. Yeah. So I can only see, well, this is interesting. That it's very hard to describe what this is about. Yeah. So even that one there, the way with the trees, it's very difficult to describe why is there this dead tree on the right hand side. And then, is this the road to follow in life? Is this the way you want to go? And is the water, is it something like a barrier, or why is it there? Yeah. So I'm no art historian, and I can't analyze paintings. Yeah.
What do you think, art historian?
Me? I don't know enough about but I just find it really interesting because whenever you look at still life, you decode often, so you can learn what the statement is sometimes in the still life, and like sometimes people would put memento moris in paintings, like if there's any kind of, I don't know if that's a fruit that's gone off or something in the foreground, which is a reminder of death in life.
Yeah.
But often when you learn as a painter, you learn all these codes to communicate. And so often this still life arrangement would maybe be from a very specific artist that they either looked up to or found influential, or what you change in your version of the still life is important, because where you're different from that other artist can be a statement about who you are or what you're trying to say. Or so I just think and just usually whenever you look at a painting, you read the spines of the books, you read the kind of wine it is, because that could tell you where we are. Are we in Italy? Are we in France? What are we doing? Or what kind of, is it an affluent person?
But I would say, well, this is about what is the difference, what is the opposite of meeting leaving. I think this is a painting about leaving, because the person who has read isn't there anymore. So she has gone, and maybe the glasses, they are left, and the fruit is rotting, but maybe the painting here is the memory, it's the beauty. But then, okay, with alcohol, come back to the memory. I don't know, the alcohol is a bit disturbing there. But this is about remembering and leaving and being on your own, being left.
And absence too.
Yeah, absence.
Absence, isn't it? Because the person...
Yeah.
You can pose all the things there, but that fruit, for instance, still tells time.
Yeah.
And the passing of it.
And the alcohol is...
Wow, that's really beautiful, Raymond. You so can interpret
Yeah,
art.
you got it.
Yes.
You got it.
But why are there two glasses? Is it one person who drinks two different drinks?
Maybe it used to be two. It was always two, and now it's one.
It's water and wine or something like that.
The absence of the other person.
Yeah. Sure. It's sad. It's about sorrow, I would say. Yeah. And maybe this is about comfort. Yeah? So to read and to concentrate on something and to be on your own and to control your thoughts or just try to think of tomorrow and of going on. But you're left. Maybe the person who painted this is alone, is left alone, and she tries to survive, maybe with some rituals.
Yeah, right, remembrance.
Yes.
Somehow, Annelisa Leinbach was the guest art teacher for a workshop about this painting in February, and she shares her reflections.
I'm Annelisa Leinbach, she, her, and I'm an artist. I really like sort of viewing the world around me as this kind of like sort of mysterious spiritual and cultural ecosystem, and just kind of like taking energy from the stuff that I see. So I think that was what first inspired me to do art, but then from there I just started experimenting with all sorts of stuff. I mean, I think this still life here is one of my favorites. And
Of Toni's?
Yeah, of Toni's. And this one was one of the ones that we taught about in the class, and I think what I like about it is that even though still lives are this kind of common motif, you feel like there's this sense of storytelling here and a feeling that something was going on right before this painting was made that's maybe kind of like continuing on after the painting. It's like someone's drinking something, someone's reading something. There's sort of this like hint of different things that are going on. I'm very drawn to art that feels like it's telling a story, but in a way that's a little bit mysterious, so that as a viewer you can still complete the story. I really enjoyed the feeling of trying to connect with this piece of art by recreating it and recreating the process. I think there's something really powerful and intimate about doing that felt like really meaningful. I mean, it really felt like we were somehow like reaching across time and connecting with her in a way that I thought was really memorable.
By creating the like still life.
Yeah, by creating the same still life and like thinking a little bit about sort of like the techniques of how this was produced.
And you getting the grapes. I love that you got the grapes.
Yeah, the way that the fruit looked and stuff. So I thought that was a really meaningful way to connect with art that I honestly wish was more commonly experienced, versus just kind of like looking at it and discussing it or writing about it, because I thought it was really profound. And kind of cool to see like how we interpreted it differently. That was the first time I ever taught a class about like a Jewish art thing also, so I thought that was really cool and meaningful as well.
That's wonderful. Toni Ebel's work alludes to her past, politics, and heartbreak. She combines multiple motifs and themes to really tell a complete story and express a clear emotion, and oftentimes a call to action. I wanted to find someone who made paintings that also use symbolism and words to tell stories about contemporary struggles, and in the past year, I was introduced to Regina's work through her feature in Ida magazine. We talked about what inspires her, and how she communicates through her art, and how long it takes her to make a piece.
My name is Regina, or as they would say in German, Regina Potomkina, or the original Russian pronunciation would be Potomkina. I'm currently working as a social media manager and also graphic designer at the Central Welfare Board of Jews in Germany, which is headquartered in Frankfurt. So I'm mostly dealing with digital graphics and also print media, but on the side I'm also studying fine arts at the Art University in Kassel, where I'm focusing on painting, and that's already, like, I'm 2 years into studying already, so yeah, that's the big passion that I have. Well, first, thank you. And I think for me, it's mostly around my paintings revolve around my close surroundings, like my family, my friends, conversations I overhear at work, maybe because I do work like in a Jewish context, and obviously my art also revolves around Jewish topics, but not only that. So it's mostly sources that are like really close by. I don't have to like really actively go out and find inspiration. I more feel like I'm surrounded by things that inspire me, if that makes sense, or people mostly. And it's weird to describe this process, but usually when an idea strikes me, it's in a moment of silence, whether I'm sitting on the balcony and just staring into the blank, or maybe I'm in the shower, or maybe I'm like lying around on my couch and staring at an empty wall, and then like only in that moment when I really like empty my head, sometimes just an image comes to my mind, and I maybe contemplate on it, like these elements might look interesting together, or I could switch up the composition in that way, and then in my mind I kind of have like this idea of how I want how the finished painting will look. And basically I just sketch it out like really roughly. I don't do like this whole sketchbook is an artwork kind of thing. It's really just like thumbnails basically, just to not forget the idea. Sometimes I also just write it down on my phone in the notes, like just in words, like what I saw, like the kind of composition and elements that I want to be together. And then usually I just take out a canvas, do like an underpainting, usually just like the outlines, and maybe like some darkness and lightness parts, and then I go in with the colors. Like it's not a very long process, I'd say. Yeah, maybe it's like conversations I have. Also, you know, my family inspires me a lot. Like my grandma might say something that I think like, oh, that could be kind of translated into an interesting image, or yeah, like especially the painting you referred to with the writing about the mezuzah and everything, that was literally like a conversation I had with my mom in the aftermath of October 7th, that she was like really worried about me having a mezuzah outside my door. So that's what I translated into. I mean, yeah, the idea generation and sketching, that's pretty fast. Also maybe the first kind of composition on the canvas, but then I take a lot of time to actually like finish it. Like, I mean, honestly, I have like a job, I have friends that I want to meet, I want to do a lot of things that are not related to sitting at home and painting.
Yeah.
So it can take like 1 to 2 months maybe for me to finish like a maybe bigger size painting, but I think it's still like pretty like it's fine for me. Yeah.
As Toni Ebel did most of her work in oil, I asked Regina why she likes oil paint and what are the benefits that she sees in using it.
Yeah, like considering these like 11 years that I've been into painting, oil painting is relatively new. I've been doing it maybe actually around the time I started out art school, maybe like 2.5, 3 years, something like that. And the reason being, I think I actually purchased oil colors, like small tubes, like the small kind of sets that you can get. I think the first one I purchased myself was in Tel Aviv when I was living there for a year. And I actually painted a painting there with those oil colors, but I had no idea whatsoever how to use mediums, what to do with these colors actually, like what the possibilities were, and I just took them like straight out of the tube and applied them to the canvas. It came out pretty well, but like in my eyes, but still. So I was like,
what did you paint? What was it? Or was it just the sketch of the city?
No, it was a naked girl on a carpet. Yes, I still have the painting here. I brought it all the way back from Tel Aviv.
Wow, that's so special.
Yeah, it is. I always remember like how I took it to like some park near my apartment building and painted in the park, and yeah, it was a really nice process of kind of like getting to know the medium, but not really. I was just like, tapping my foot in there, yeah, I remember also as a kid, maybe I got a set of oil colors, and they were on the cheaper end, I would say, because I remember when I tried them, it made no sense what those colors were doing. So I was like, this isn't working. So I didn't like even continue looking into like how to work with them. But anyways, then a few years passed, and I thought, now I'm like considering applying for art school. It was kind of like something I always wanted to try, especially after like getting into also graphic design, and then like continuing into this like creative path. And graphic design is awesome and amazing because it's kind of like a craft you can apply in a job that pays stably, but the real thing is always doing art. So I've always like played with the thought of applying in an art school, kind of up until like before 2 years ago or so. And I think like when I considered working on a portfolio, I already knew, okay, I want to kind of make my portfolio topic kind of like Jewish topics that I care about, something that will, represent my character, my personality, my background. So I think that's when I started again to try work with oil colors, and I watched some YouTube tutorials on what's a medium and how to work with all these like weird liquids that you put together to make those colors do something that you actually like. And so I mean, as you can tell, or as you can hear, maybe like oil colors is something that, I mean, it takes more effort than I would prefer, but I still find like the benefits I see in it now that I've been working in it, like with oil colors pretty much exclusively those past 2 years, is that first of all, it allows me to extend the process. Like it dries so much slower that it just allows me to like go back and forth with the painting and just leave it for a few days and know, okay, the colors will still be as I mix them and I can still like use them. So that's amazing. I also like really got used to kind of like the buttery consistency of how they mix into each other. So that's very, it's very comfortable in the process, I would say. Like the way also I can use different brushes to make it like more smooth versus more kind of like this shattered kind of appearance of the colors, if you know what I mean, like to make it look like hay versus like a gradient kind of transition. And then recently I thought to myself, okay, I haven't painted in acrylics for so long, let's go back and see how it works. And I started painting in acrylics, and I was like, oh my god, first of all, this dries way too fast. Second of all,
so used to the oil, like it was so
because I was like not used to it anymore, and then it dries darker. Like that's what bothers me the most now. Like what I saw when I tried to paint again in acrylics, it was like, that's not the color that I wanted. It's like, a few shades darker than what I mixed, and then it bothers me because I want this specific color.
Right.
So, yeah.
And as a graphic designer, that's a different number.
I know. So I was like, screw that. I'm painting over this thing with oils.
So you just took the acrylic and you were like, no.
I just painted on top. But I will say I do the underpainting in acrylics because it's faster. Like, again, it has its benefits for different tasks, I would say, in the process. So I do the underpainting in acrylics, which sometimes also sucks because, like, I notice when I apply the color too thickly, it just absorbs the oil, and then you have all these like weird stripes. So that's something to be careful about, which I'm like kind of upset now on the current painting that I'm working on. It like absorbed a bit too much, but then I'm saying it's like something I wanted on purpose. But yeah,
process.
it's true. So yeah, but I've kind of really developed a preference and habit in oil. I would say that I wouldn't trade to go back to acrylics anymore.
Toni Ebel arrived in Berlin in June of 1945 and stayed with her half-sister. After the war, she also reconnected with her brother Arthur Ebel and his family. Toni Ebel's art from her period in exile is mostly lost. She had to leave all of her belongings behind. Ebel received a pension as a victim of fascism, and in 1946, she joined the Association for Protection of Visual Artists and the Free German Trade Union Association. In 1947, she became a member of the SED, or Socialist Union Party of Germany. I had the pleasure of speaking to Mina, who wrote an article about Toni Ebel in Text zur Kunst for their Transperspectives issue. We met in Tiergarten, only a short walk away from the grounds of the Hirschfeld Institute for Sexual Science. It was very special to do the interview in that place where Toni Ebel spent some really important years of her life.
I'm Mina Pleasure-Bouvar. My pronouns are she or they. In German, like she with a little star. Yeah, and my title is a bachelor's degree I made sometime, I guess, but like I work freelance as a political educator or political agitator, depending on the situation. I work mainly in like political education on trans issues, on trying to frame like trans and queer politics in a left-wing frame and connect them with materialist and liberatory politics. My specialization in that is like fascism studies and working on the connections of politically organized transphobia and current fascist movements and figuring out how they interconnect and like how fascism uses forms of transphobia, especially transmisogyny, at the moment as one of its unfortunately most potent political tools, and how to combat it. Yeah, like my outlook on things is like things that happen in the now are informed by the past, and like studying how they are informed by the past and what relations lie in them that are historical relations helps me to understand how the present can develop, like what potentials are in the present for different outcomes. Like that's like pretty basic historical materialism stuff, like understanding where you can go from here by understanding how the here came to be. Yeah, like as I maybe try to illustrate, like my outlook is relatively theoretical, like it's political theory growing out of political praxis, and it is often pretty dry of like, yeah, you now have this analysis and you're grounded in theories of historical materialism and socialism, and it's like understanding how it works conceptually and so on and so forth. But like in the end I have to get people to engage, because like I would say my politics is a politics of doing shit and doing shit together. And I think art can unlock a more wholesome perspective. And like if I say I want an outlook, a political outlook of not just how can I understand transphobia as part of political process, but also like see how a trans perspective gives me a better understanding of a political process, then therefore I also want to have a trans perspective in the arts, have a trans and queer perspective on arts or on expressed in artworks, because otherwise it wouldn't be a whole picture.
I asked Mina about why she finds Ebel's portraits interesting.
she depicts herself in a way of like her trans femininity as her womanhood she has worked for and she is actualized is very different from what we associate with trans femininity today, but it is like it is her life she built with her own hands, and it is her life or herself at the way she has fought herself to move on. And like I find this extremely interesting, and I find it really moving to see her the way she saw herself. And I think that's touching for me. After the war, Toni Ebel returned to Germany, to Berlin specifically, and you found a picture of her with a little VVN pin. Like VVN is like Vereinigung der Verfolgten des Nazi-Regimes.
The translation of this organization is the association or union of people who were persecuted during the Nazi regime. The painting that Mina talked about is a beautiful self-portrait that Ebel drew in pastel in 1952, titled Friedenskämpferin, or Peace Fighter. It was shown at the Dritte Deutsche Kunstausstellung in 1953, with the whereabouts still unknown. It's a 60 by 50 centimeter painting, and in it, Toni Ebel holds her brushes against her chest, maybe in the place of a gun or another weapon of violence. It looks like she's proud of what she's accomplished and is looking at her work. On her lapel is a VVN pin. During the next 8 years until her death, Toni Ebel painted so many incredible works that we still have today. This was a portrait in a prolific period when she was finally receiving recognition and acclaim she deserved in the DDR. The story of how the VVN started and what trials the association has been through in the almost 80 years since it was founded is an important one to tell. In the spring of 1945, in the final months before the liberation of the camp, the Buchenwald resistance group, made of anti-fascists from many countries, was able to steal and stockpile ammunition and weapons. On April 11, 1945, the group gave an order to revolt, and they were able to take weapons, switch off electricity in the fence, and take over the guard towers. Because of this action, over 20,000 former prisoners were saved. 2 days later, the U.S. Army took over the camp. On April 19, 1945, the freed prisoners of Buchenwald concentration camp in their own languages made an oath. Quote, "We will only stop the fight when the last guilty stands before the judges of the nations. The destruction of Nazism with its roots is our slogan. The creation of a new world of peace and freedom is our goal. We owe it to our murdered comrades and their families."
I think one of the core parts is the Oath of Buchenwald as the founding principle of the VVN, of like we try to forge a world free of fascism in which liberation is possible. That's like at the core of the founding of VVN.
After 1949, once Berlin and Germany formally split into West and East, into the Federal Republic of Germany and the German Democratic Republic, the way the VVN Association and its members were treated varied greatly. Because of the anti-communist sentiments of West Germany, people distanced themselves from the VVN, who were against remilitarization and former Nazis getting positions of power in the new government. This dissolved coalitions, causing VVN members to be further marginalized, despite all they had suffered in World War II.
Yeah, this big anti-socialist, anti-communist sentiment affecting proper anti-fascist organizing.
In 1962, the organization was even attempted to be banned, but they were stopped because the Nazi past of the judge came to light. In the 1970s in West Germany, the VVN became the VVN Bund der Antifaschisten, Association of Anti-Fascists, or VVN-BDA, which included younger generations of anti-fascist activists and direct survivors of fascism. And in 2002, the VVN-BDA West and VVN-BDA East joined to be the current organization it is today. In East Germany, the VVN was dissolved by party leadership in 1953 and was replaced by the Komitee der Antifaschisten Widerstandskämpfer, or the Committee of Anti-Fascist Resistance Fighters, which was aligned with the SED.
We declare fascism to be over.
Right.
We have solved it. It's like the state line and the party line.
Right.
Therefore, we don't need a non-state actor to do anti-fascist organism because we are already the anti-fascist state.
Mm-hmm.
It's like interesting viewpoint on history. So we have her with her life story then in the emerging GDR. And for her, and we see this in her letters also with Charlotte, for her, she had a very practical and direct connection with socialism as a politics of liberation, as a politics of anti-fascism, as a politics of ending the Nazi regime. And for her, of course, the GDR was like a project she engaged in. She saw herself not as a out there, somewhat societally removed artist, but as a artistic worker. Of course, she changed her narrative to get her life's narrative to get funding in the space of living. Like she said, I'm an academic artist, as I have a classical academic socialization and background as an artist, which, as we know it, is not true. She was self-taught and autodidact in that, but documents got lost during the war, so she pretended to make herself a living, and I think that's fair. What artwork of her is striking for me. I always think back of her self-portraits.
Why?
Because it's what I said with, I think she saw herself, of course, as an artist, but also as a worker, as a craftsperson who's doing her craft. Art is her craft. She's doing art as part of her, or work. She's seeing it as work. Yeah. And she's depicting herself not as a fancy artist, but as an artistic worker. You see her in her used shirt as a painter with used paintbrushes. That doesn't look like a fancy depiction of a out there artist. It looks like an artistic worker. And I find this interesting of her style. And now comes a little bit of art historical nerdiness into the place.
Please, give it, yes.
Her style is informed by her self-taught craft of Rembrandt reproductions. Therefore, her style is pretty realistic as an art style. We see it also in quotations from her, where she is not the biggest fan of expressionist or more abstract forms of art.
I hate impressionists. They can't draw trees or something that.
Something I want to see a tree, not just a line.
Right. It's from that article. Yeah, that's such a good article, right? She's so funny. She's so funny.
Yeah, and she's genuinely extremely funny. But her art style is a realistic art style, and then we have this Rembrandt-informed realistic art style in the early German Democratic Republic, in this socialist Germany, where I think it is on an interesting junction of different things happening in this point of art history. We have her with a self-taught classical, artistic, realistic upbringing, but we also have this Soviet-informed state doctrine of socialist realism that features or that fosters a realistic art style. But if you look into Soviet-style socialist realism, that is like, of course, the art style is realistic, but the depictions are not realistic in that sense. For example, we have like very romanticized paintings of Ukrainian landscapes that are like realistic, beautiful, lush landscapes. But the reality of these landscapes, as this was the place where a big part of World War II was raging, is that these landscapes were destroyed, that they were barren, that they were forged by the ongoing war, or by the war that happened there mainly. So we have a realistic depiction of something utopian, of something that isn't there.
The pin that Ebel is wearing we can only see in black and white because the surviving photograph of the painting in black and white is all we have. But in color, this would have been a red upside-down triangle. This symbol was used in concentration camps to identify political prisoners in countries occupied by the Nazis. The more well-known internationally upside-down pink triangle was used to identify queer victims of the Nazis. Memorials for victims of fascism in Germany and occupied countries oftentimes will have an upside-down red triangle. In San Francisco, there is a pink triangle memorial in the neighborhood of the Castro made up of rose quartz crystals that you are encouraged to pick from and take with you to hold the memory of the victims close to you. For many people, the VVN was how they remembered victims of the Shoah. For Toni, this included many of her friends and community. We don't know if Toni Ebel outwardly criticized the GDR, but wearing the VVN pin in this portrait in 1952, the year before the association was dissolved, is significant and gives us a more nuanced understanding of her politics at this time. While she was a socialist and supportive of the East German state, she subversively criticized some of its policies in her art, and she was not the only one. In 1952 and 1953, governmental policies created food insecurity, an increase in working hours, and worse living conditions for many. This led to the uprising of June 17, 1953, where approximately 1 million people protested against the economic and political situation in the DDR, which ended in state violence and murder, injury, and arrest of many demonstrators. I also asked Mina what she would want to say to Toni, or ask her.
We would want to know more of how she experienced the GDR. Like my parents, my biological parents, I would say had a vastly different outlook. Like they were pretty bougie, center-leftists who were like, or more centrist than leftist, who were like in the Christian congregation and therefore had more negative outlook on the GDR as they experienced it. And I would like to see what having these experiences of Toni Ebel, who went through the Nazi regime, for her, whom this socialist project was like a more practical outlook of actually creating the new society. And I would love to hear from her how she experienced it, like how she experienced the very narrowness and like bureaucratic stiffness of the GDR, but also how she felt like the everyday life was organized. How applicable was it to what she clearly was doing, trying to enact a better life for herself and her people? Like getting to know how. And I would say, like, she was part of this artist movement who partitioned for including art into the street images, into the walls of buildings in the public space, like making the public sphere more artful. And I would like to ask her how she experienced the reactions to this petition, how she would say what role played art in the GDR, or at different points during the GDR that she experienced, that she lived through.
Yeah. We know that Toni Ebel was against remilitarization. She paints this message in a clear, intricate, and stunning way in the largest surviving painting of hers we have so far discovered. As touched on before, we know that Toni Ebel was against remilitarization. She paints this message in a clear, intricate, and stunning way in the largest surviving painting of hers that we have so far discovered, measuring 125 by 179.5 centimeters, titled Zerreiß den Gestellungsbefehl, or Tear Up Your Draft Papers.
And you see a family situation where a young boy looks very sad because he has received this letter, and the mother embraces him and comforts him. The father is more strict with the raised finger, and he's supposed, I would say, he says, well, you have to do what the authorities say. It's no damage, it's no harm, you have to go. And then you have an uncle sitting there with only one arm. So he had been a soldier in World War I. And the boy sits there, looks on the table, and is very sad that he has to be a soldier. And then there is a paper, a pamphlet, lying on the table. And when you turn the painting, you can read the title. And the title says, Amigo Home. And when you think of Toni painting this Amigo Home, and thinking of Charlotte Charlaque, the American citizen who had gone home, so why would she? Well, I have a bit of difficulties with this painting.
Just like Ebel's painting with the Vivienne pin, the significance of her painting this particular motif in 1951 is very revealing of her own personal politics and story hidden among subjects and style choices of the times. After 1951, when this artwork was in the Artists Create for Peace show, it was no longer shown or accessible to the public and remained in the bowels of the archives until being rediscovered and researched by Dr. Emily Evans.
My name is Emily Evans. My pronouns are she and her. What's my position? I'm a wissenschaftliche Mitarbeiterin, which means I'm a researcher at the New National Gallery. I have been there since the fall of 2018. I have some experience working on exhibitions, and I worked at the Museum Ludwig in Cologne. But my studies were almost all in the United States. I went to Smith College and to the University of Illinois. The title, Zerreißt den Gestellungsbefehl. It's interesting. I mean, the Gestellungsbefehl is what, the conscription notice or the draft, the getting called up for the draft. Zerreißt is the imperative. It's the plural imperative, tear it up. So the title addresses the audience, I think, of the painting, because, if it's the older generation we see in this painting talking to the young man, they wouldn't say zerreißt with a T at the end to him, they would say zerreiß. So it's actually the painter speaking to her viewers.
Wow.
I think. It's a call to action to sort of take this nonviolent or anti-militarist action at the smallest possible level, which is on this personal level. There's something unrealistic about it, right? Because a young man tearing up his draft notice would have been in such colossal trouble and really would have had no recourse and no defense in an era like that. So there's something incredibly idealistic about this imperative as well. It's supposed to, I think, speak to the ideas and not speak to actual actions.
Emily was kind enough to take time out of her day to let me see this painting held in the archives of the New National Gallery. Toni Ebel's painting was wrapped up almost like a present and had to be skillfully lowered and unwrapped so that we could view it and examine its contents. It was put on stretchers, but has a lot of damage that needs retouching. While we spoke, the painting was being unwrapped and displayed, and you can hear some of these sounds in the conversation. Some of these paintings here are on loan from organizations in the DDR that do not exist anymore, such as the Kulturfonds. They are still figuring out who they belong to, as restitution is not so easy in this case.
I was doing this research project about this, these 85 or 90 paintings, and it was our secretary at the time who Googled a bunch of the names for me, and when he Googled the names, he came up with
The names on the backs of the
research.
paintings? Or?
No, the names of the painters.
I see.
Because a lot of them, we didn't have the date of death, we didn't have this, we didn't have that. We were looking for so much information. So the secretary at the time Googled Toni Ebel and came up with the research done by the Magnus Hirschfeld. Yeah, exactly.
Amazing.
It would be great to put it out and just say, okay, whoever the legal owner is, we'd like to pursue a long-term loan because we think this is a work that deserves to be known. But since part of my work has been sorting out what is and isn't actually a part of our collection, I started looking at this group of 85 to 90 because we needed to clarify this. It's high time to just clarify it. So it's not, it's one group, there's 85 or 90 paintings, but they don't all have the same status. We just needed to clarify it. And that was how I got involved.
Wow, that's amazing. And you proposed this project to do this research and...
Yeah, I mean, it was something the museum wanted to do, was to do this massive collections catalog. And since I had worked on the last one, I really wanted to work on this one. I wrote my PhD thesis actually about socialist realism in photography in the Soviet Union. I learned Russian for it because I was totally interested in socialist realism. So with all of these things from the 50s, I was like, come on, this is mine.
Emily shares her observations and insights with me while we examine the work up close and in an incredible setting.
So our chief conservator has, bit by bit, had her interns conserve these paintings because they were given to the National Gallery in such bad condition. It's unclear whose purview are they really in, but it's advantageous for the interns to get to work on them. And of course, it just means you're taking better care of the art. So that's why bit by bit, all of these paintings have either been put on stretchers, like the ones you saw in the other room, or this one at least getting mounted to stabilize it. That's why they're being stored this way.
To prevent further damage?
To prevent further damage, exactly. And there's usually maximum one intern at a time. We have about 90 paintings like this, so you can imagine how slowly progress is getting achieved. But the idea is that bit by bit everything gets stabilized and sort of treated a little bit better. At the same time, it's a question of time and resources because they literally just aren't ours. And we have a lot of stuff in the collection that also calls for attention. So it's kind of a balance. Yeah, so as you see, the painting has just been treated badly in the past. It has these cracks. There are gaps where some of the paint has come off of the surface. And that's something that happened probably in the 1950s already. As far as we know, this must have been painted in 1951, maybe 1950.
Because of the exhibition?
It was painted probably for the exhibition. And there are contemporary references that you see in it, but it was intended to be an ideological painting, and the exhibition itself was highly ideological. And then very quickly, the thing that had been promoted and the artworks that were promoted in the exhibition fell out of favor almost right away again. So I sort of doubt, but we don't have proof either way, I really doubt that this was seen after the exhibition. I don't think that it necessarily was.
So it was just bought or take, it was made for the exhibition?
It was made for the exhibition, and I think that Toni Ebel was paid for it, so it was the property of the federal government when they didn't sell it from the exhibition. But then the federal government didn't want it again after all. So that's why it was literally, physically not treated well.
So it had
and removed from the stretcher, put in a big stack with all of these others in order to save space, and just put it away somewhere. And then they decided all these things are taking up too much space in our basement. We have to put them somewhere. And in some meeting, somebody said, well, then why don't we just give it all to the state museums? They have all this storage space. And it ended up in the basement of the Altes Museum. In
DDR times, though.
Yes,
okay.
In the 50s or 60s. And all of these paintings, because they were contemporary, 20th century paintings, were sort of put in the hands of the National Gallery because that was the obvious institution for contemporary work. It's interesting because I guess artistically it's so obvious. A lot of these really ideological images work kind of on one level only, right? It's not the sort of artwork where it's like you have one layer and another layer and you keep on uncovering and there's more here. It's not a painting that does that, which I think is why this and all of the others from the group, almost all the others from the group, were just not interesting to the curators at the National Gallery. This is, if you think about art as being something that's really complex, that does things, this, I think, just didn't make their cut because, it was made for ideological purposes. And that's also not what the curators of the National Gallery wanted. They didn't want to just be serving ideology, so why work on stuff like this? There's the conflicted young man who's torn up his draft notice. And look at his fists. He's so upset, but he needs the comfort of that's maybe a mother or a grandmother. It's kind of hard to say.
Yeah.
The other young man next to him who's lost the bottom half of an arm, probably in World War II, because he looks young enough, we're probably talking World War II. Then there's the grandfather making a point, pointing at the newspaper and saying, hey.
And pointing directly at the boy.
Exactly. Well. So they're discussing, and but it's interesting. The woman in the picture has a comforting role. The young man with who's an amputee is kind of a warning. And the grandfather, I'm not sure what his role is. We can't see the print in the newspaper that he's pointing to, whether he's saying, maybe he's saying do your duty, or maybe he's saying...
It says remit...
Oh, yeah. Oh, no, it does say something. Remilitarisierung führt zum Krieg.
Oh, there you go.
Yeah. Remilitarization leads to war. And then, the even stronger warning, the two men on the wall with the black ribbons and the black and white photos. And there's actually a German word for it. It's called Trauerflor. Trauer, like mourning, and Flor, which makes me think of flowers, but I guess it refers to the ribbon as well. Yeah. World War II uniform, World War I uniform, they both died.
And like ancestors is the thought there.
I guess so. Yeah. It must be.
Yeah.
I mean, for this a relatively simple-looking household in the background. They have some old chairs. They have a kind of modern tablecloth.
I love this tablecloth. I think this is the most. Oh. You don't like it?
It's not my cup of tea, but everybody's different.
Well, I mean, like in all of her paintings, this is something that's very unique to me because we don't really see like anything abstract.
Oh, okay.
So that's why I think it's interesting because this is her one little.
Oh, it's like the moment where it happens.
Right. Exactly.
Oh, that's interesting.
And she also, it's like she didn't. That it wasn't. It's it's very flat. It's like all these colors she never used, which I find really interesting. Yeah.
It also helps cover just a lot of the area of this rather large canvas. Because there's the plain wall, the plain door. It's interesting, this mirror above the washstand with this red curtain. It's this funny, it's like this art historical, the red curtain behind the portrait of the prince or something. It's such a funny moment in here. But it could also be a reference to really small living spaces where you have curtains to separate for privacy. It could almost go either way. But it's actually the... a sort of unclear part in this otherwise really clear picture.
Yeah, the mirror is very interesting. It's like mirror, picture, door. So it's like very spaced out.
That's
as well.
True. Yeah, it anchors each segment of the painting. Yeah. And there you have the door, the two pictures, the mirror, and you also have the four people in front. So there's a balance there. Yeah, and I guess there is a working class reference here as well. If you look at the grandfather with the rolled up shirt sleeves, and I think that must be a measuring stick in his back pocket.
What does it say?
I don't know. It looks like it has markings.
I see.
Doesn't
it says 1, 2, 3.
Yeah, exactly.
Wow.
So there's a reference to like the working class, the work with your hands element. There's solidarity with so many different kinds of people in this picture. There's the solidarity with the women who are left behind, the solidarity with the young man and with the veteran and with the working class, and the remembrance of the dead, and it really brings a lot together. Actually, when I think of photos of soldiers, at least the ones that I'm familiar with, it's always a straight-on photo, no facial expression, it's like a passport photo almost, except they're in uniform. But here, the one with the World War II uniform, he's got these wide-open eyes like he's shocked or scared. And the one from World War I is actually downcast, like he's literally looking down and his eyes are downcast. And it's funny I can't imagine that would have been permitted in a sort of a more official photo of a soldier at the time, but it adds this element of feeling about the military service, I think.
Right, there's definitely an opinion associated with these photographs.
Right. And it suggests the feeling of the soldier, which is, historically the feelings of the soldier were usually not a matter of concern to the people who are in charge. So, but what we see on it, of course, what we can read the most easily is this flyer that says, Ami, go home. But also this ripped up piece of paper, Gestellungsbefehl.
And these are the draft papers?
Exactly, that's being called up for the draft. Or getting conscripted, or whatever the proper term would be. And this thing on the right, in blue, Weltfriedensrat gibt Antwort. And this is at a time, of course, it's ideological no matter what side of the Iron Curtain you're standing on. But the Ami Go Home is obviously about the American occupiers. This is also about the East German government and the Soviet occupiers representing themselves as being the only force for peace. There are some aspects of military history that I'm not totally clear on because they've just gone too far past what I'm actually researching. I know, for example, that the Nationale Volksarmee in the GDR was not founded until later in the 50s. And I think that the Bundeswehr, it's not clear to me if they were actually conscripting at the time that this painting was painted.
After visiting the depository, I looked into this to make clear the timeline. Starting in the later part of the 1940s, the SED and Soviets had a 20,000-member military police force, and in the spring of 1952, the People's Army was formed under the guise of expansion of the police with the goal of enlisting 160 to 200,000 troops, and they got 113,000 by the summer of 1953. They did this through offering bonus incentives and by establishing officers specifically to recruit soldiers, usually young people fresh from the required military education. If a recruitment presentation at work or school was missed, a representative of the party or a police officer may show up at your home. By 1955, there was no conscription yet, but the methods of enlisting volunteers verged on forced enlisting, which included threatening job loss, forced intoxication, and kidnapping. Disapproval of the GDR's military was for many reasons, including not wanting to get into another war, as Toni so clearly illustrates in her painting. Vandalizing of recruitment posters in the 1950s would have slogans such as, "We'll tear up our draft papers. We don't want fratricide, not us." On January 24th, 1962, universal conscription was introduced shortly after finishing the Berlin Wall.
So the East German cultural authorities began to basically implement socialist realism as a policy and as a method around 1951. And it's hard to say. It was difficult for a lot of artists. There were artists who also totally believed in the socialist cause, but artistically they had serious disagreements. That could make it very difficult for them. Anybody who wasn't into the ideological cause, of course, they're being put under pressure. But of course, there were also artists who really sincerely believed in it, just like in the Soviet Union, who really sincerely believed that this was the right thing and they're really behind it. And so of course, there's a huge span in the art scene. But also in the 1950s, the Kulturfonds der DDR, which was subordinate to the Ministry of Culture, the Kulturfonds had tons of money to spend. They spent it on local groups of children playing the recorder in some village. They used it to decorate the rooms of a workers' club here or there. They used money for all kinds of things. They also funded tons of purchases by the museums. So the span that they covered was huge. And also, they were funding artists, like individual people. So in the 50s, an artist could approach the Kulturfonds and say, I propose painting an image of, and it's going to have these dimensions, and that's what it's going to look like. And they would say, okay, then we'll give you a contract to produce this painting. And so it was a way of having money and commissions come directly to the artist, but of course, there's a mechanism of control involved there as well. And so this painting is produced in the context when the Kulturfonds they have political, cultural goals to pursue, but they're also supporting individual artists.
Right before the interview ended, we had the exciting moment of discovering Toni Ebel's signature together. And there's no signature here, right?
I don't see a signature at all.
Usually I think you did bottom left, but no, I don't see anything. I did, yeah.
Oh, no, there is.
Okay.
Right there, Toni Ebel.
So small.
It's really, really small, and there's no year.
Or maybe it's
scratched
off.
Or it's flaked off. Yeah.
Oh my goodness. Wow, that's very small. That's like the smallest brush stroke in the whole painting, it looks like, besides the writing.
Yeah.
Wow.
No, it's a lot smaller than the newspaper stuff that we can see.
Toni Ebel making this painting before the draft went into effect is almost like she is giving a warning of what could happen if East Germany does not remember the consequences of wars before, criticizing the idea that an army, or wars in general, could be the way to create world peace. The reason why this painting became so unpopular and was treated so badly was because its subject matter left a bad taste in the very people that commissioned it to be made soon after it was finished. Anti-war and anti-military was just no longer in style. I find it interesting how she also portrays disability. The amputee is still at the table, not removed fully or put in a corner either. Toni became disabled after the First World War. I think this affected how she painted him. Just like Rembrandt, one of her favorite artists, Toni Ebel also made many self-portraits throughout her whole life, and Clara Hartman, who runs the Lily Elba Library, discovered 2 of these portraits. One is maybe the earliest self-portrait we have so far discovered in the photo section of Magnus Hirschfeld's 1930 volume Geschlechtskunde, or Gender/Sex Education, and the second discovered painting is a pastel portrait of Ebel in a stylish hat with a blue ribbon. In the 1930s, Toni Ebel and Lily Elba likely crossed paths or knew of each other from the Institute. Toni Ebel had paintings exhibited at the 1951/1952 Artists Create for Peace exhibit and the Dresden 4th German Arts Exhibition in 1958/1959, including a self-portrait and a portrait of her sister. Ebel became acquainted with the director of the Markisch Museum from 1953 to 1957, Heinrich Beck, and through him she likely met Charlotte von Mahlsdorf, who was training as a museum curator and would go on to form her own collection and start her own museum that still exists today in Mahlsdorf, called the Grunderzeit Museum. Toni Ebel was a member of the GDR's Association of Visual Artists and appeared frequently in the GDR press. Her social circle and who she painted with is not fully discovered. We do know that Jewish artist Joseph Bruck painted Ebel's portrait in 1952, where she wears a beautiful necklace, chunky rings, and has expressive hands positioned like she is explaining something. Her portrait by Fritz Dahn is beautiful and also expressive in graphic and loose impressionistic brushstrokes with her recognizable white hair and black circular glasses. Starting in 1953, Toni Ebel had a studio apartment at Strassburger Platz 8 in Friedrichshain. She was visited there by Adelaide Schultz, who was the former housekeeper at the Institute for Sexual Science. In 1955, Charlotte Charlaque published an article in the American LGBT publication One Magazine mentioning Toni and anonymizing her as Arna Engel and calling her a leading portraitist of Germany. I had the opportunity to view this article and look through the bound copy of the magazine at the archives in Los Angeles this May. The archive was very warm and welcoming, with a stunning wall of magazine covers. In 1954, 1958, and 1960, Toni Ebel participated in district art exhibitions in Berlin. She was recognized by her peers and art critics as of considerable talent, and appeared in many group exhibitions and solo exhibitions, notably for her 75th birthday in 1956 at the Alter Marstall, or Old Stables, on Breitestrasse, a large, beautiful Baroque building. In 1957, Ebel was in a group exhibition with Dagmar Glaser-Lauermann, who designed the mosaic mural at the Tierpark U5 station. A poster advertising this exhibition is kept at the Akademie der Kunst Art Collection's holdings and can be viewed upon request. When I went to the Akademie der Kunst reading room, I was pleased to find a whole collection of brown old newspaper clippings in a scrapbook about Ebel. Mara describes these articles and her impressions and relationship with Ebel's story.
My name is Mara Portner, and my pronouns are she, her, and yes, I'm married to Hani. I think it's just Toni. She's a character, as you would say, a Berlin original, and so I get the vibe. And she also talks how I talk. She speaks more Berlinerish than me. Actually, she's like a more pure, whatever the fuck that means, version of it, or also just older at the same time. But so it's very interesting, and it's always, every article about her always mentions that she's tiny and she has a very deep voice, and so that's interesting. I'm not tiny, but I relate to the deep voice part, and also the Berlinerisch. And so there's this one article that you found that is basically where this was for her 76th birthday, like shortly afterwards. For her 75th birthday, she had an exhibition, and so there was a couple of articles about that, and then like after her sometime after that, like after she turned 76, she got an exhibition for. She was asked by the Academie der Künste to submit something, and that's a big deal. And she said, I had to turn 76 for them to do that. But she also said it's nice the state didn't forget about us old socialists, because she got. She says she got like she got a pension. Mm-hmm. Which is also interesting because it's not saying, she wasn't out in East Germany as far as I know, just from these articles and from how she talks about herself. Like it says she worked after she ran away from home, she worked as a she always like uses the feminine form of the nouns when she talks about herself, like even before she transitioned, which is also something I do for the most part. I think almost, yeah. So that's, because like some people don't do that, but a lot of trans people do that, and now we have proof that even this trans woman who transitioned 100 years ago did that. So that's nice. And also in general, just with Toni and Charlotte, but also their friends, like some of the stuff Hani has told me, some of the stuff I've learned, it's the same. Like we haven't changed. It's the same jokes and it's the same drama and similar dynamics. And so that's something also why I feel I know her, and I would describe her as a stubborn old woman, but like in like affectionately, because that's like and an original Berlin original, a real character.
An article from New Zeit gives us a more in-depth look into her life during this time, with a wonderful interview conducted mostly in Berlinerish. Mara summarizes this article and gives us her thoughts on Ebel.
This article is from the 9th of February, 1958. The thing is that she was visited for because of the upcoming exhibition, and the article opens with them saying, we should have brought a microphone or a camera or both, because she's such a character. We just want you to, and it's sad we didn't record any of that. So we wrote down what she said, and they wrote it down in Berlinerish, like how she spoke, which is not something normally you wouldn't. It's like rarely used in print. It's very like spoken metrolect dialect, but vernacular. But it's.
Did you say metrolect?
Yeah, that's technically Berlinerish is not a dialect but a metrolect, because and this is like a German linguistics concept, but it's because it has so many different languages in it. So it's not just a dialect of German because it has so many different influences, and also because there's like so many different forms of Berlinerish, like back in the day, like 200 years ago, and more, 250 to 200 years ago, the gentrification happened for the first time in modern times in Berlin. But back then, you would be able to tell from which neighborhood someone was from by how they spoke, because also just because they would have a different background. People, Jewish people would have like a lot of more Yiddishisms than other people. French people would have more French in it. Yeah, so, and then it's just uninterrupted her speaking for the rest of the article in Berlinerish, and it's printed in Berlinerish. And so she talks about her life, and she talks about her art. It seems like she just talked for like 2 hours uninterrupted, probably, and then they just cut out the best quotes. And she's talking about how she is not an impressionist, how she's a realist. Which is also, there's also like a political part to that. In this time in the GDR, she was like making the art for the working class, of the working class, and so she didn't like that was what the cultural ideology was in the GDR at the time. So she was also representing that, but she's also, it's also just a statement of her preference. And so she says she's a realist. She doesn't want it to be too deconstructed. They can smudge whatever they want on the paintings, but she wants to see a real tree and not just a line. So that's the opening quote of the article. And she's also saying like, oh, why are you writing an article about me? There's already so many. And then she takes all her newspaper clippings. She has like a folder with newspaper clippings and shows them. And a lot of them were the articles for her 75th birthday. But then she said, oh, but it's okay. You can still write about me. It's good for you because you could become an art historian someday if you learn about me. So that's what I mean by saying like she's an original, she's a character. And so she talks about being a realist, and she talks about her art practice, that is not one of those people who has to paint all the time. She likes to, she's like old now, she paints like 3 or 4 hours a day still, but not all day. And she also can't just work on one. She always works on multiple paintings at once. And asked about how she got into painting, she says, she's like a natural. She taught herself. She never had any formal training. Her dad painted a bit too, so that she had like that. But her dad didn't want her to be a painter, and so she went away when she was 18 years old. And then she was traveling. She was like and she says specifically like female companion of this like art dealer, and they traveled the world and whatever. So that's how, and then she was painting on the side while they were doing that. She doesn't talk about running away from home because she was trans or queer. She says it's because I wanted to paint, which I think is interesting. I don't know, if that's her rewriting her own history or just only telling a specific archetype, or if that's actually how it happened and she became gay later. Who knows? But so that's interesting. And she talks about, she taught herself, and she just studied anatomy, and after the war, when she came back to Berlin, from books, and then she also studied Rembrandt, and she says that's the best school. And she talks about how Rembrandt did a lot of self-portraits, and she does a lot of self-portraits. So that's her big inspiration, or like the main artist she studied. Of course, being a painter, she was also asked what her favorite color was, and she said, "Oh, why are you asking? It's red. Because I'm red myself." And she said, "Oh, what's the best painting you ever made?" And she said, "Oh, that's Hiroshima," which is a painting. She describes it as a painting of a woman who is standing next to a poster, and the poster is telling the passerbys to keep a minute of silence for the victims of Hiroshima. And that's in the House of the Magistrate, who has a lot of paintings of her. And there's also one in the House Berlin, which she donated, and that she's also proud of that one. So she's basically like painting this picture of herself as that she is like content. She's old, she's still painting. The state is taking care of her. She's happy to be a socialist, and she doesn't like modern art is not for her. That's which is interesting because she's also a modern artist, but the modern art of her time is not for her. That's what she said.
And impressionist art.
But she says she used to be an impressionist, but she stopped because she studied Rembrandt. So she was like impressionistic. And that's the time when she started out. That's when it should make sense.
I met Eliza Jane Coyle at the Magnus Hirschfeld Gesellschaft last year. I asked how she first learned about Ebel and what her story leaves her feeling. Seeing the photos of Toni Ebel with her family make me really emotional. All these people that love her, want to spend time with her, want her close by. It gives me hope and it gives me strength. Toni Ebel died after fighting a long and difficult illness in the Buch district of Berlin on June 9, 1961, at age 79. Her funeral service was held at the Baumschumweg crematorium, and her obituary lovingly remarked that her memory will always be honored. And we must be a part of that. In 2022, Raymond Wolfert and Ezra Paul Afghan organized the exhibit at Sonntagsclub, Toni Ebel, 1881 to 1961, Painter, A Search for Clues. Toni Ebel was portrayed by Blanca Vey in the 2023 film El Dorado, Everything the Nazis Hated. On May 6, 2023, there was a community-organized memorial to honor the 90 years since the sealing of the Institute. Ebel had an exhibit in 2023 in Solingen at the Center for Persecuted Arts. There have been 2 events about Toni Ebel held at the Magnus Hirschfeld Society, where we learned about her life and made art. Ebel has an upcoming exhibition in Prague in the summer of 2025, and soon her portrait will also travel to Chicago to be in a group exhibit on early queer history. There are still several mysteries to uncover about Toni's works.
Of course, there was one of the relatives who said, oh yes, we've even got photographs of Toni and friends of hers, so we can now reconstruct more or less some of the circles she moved in after the war. And there was one man who came here who had inherited an album with the photographs of his mother, and he showed these photographs to us because Toni Ebel is on them.
My goodness.
And then I showed him this picture, and he said, oh yes, I know. This painting I've seen before. It was in my parents' flat. I only called it The Woman Who...
like peeling potatoes or something? Yeah.
Who peels potatoes. So this is the potato peeler. Yeah. Because he was a boy when he saw the painting, the potato peeler. Yeah.
Absolutely incredible.
Yeah, but we don't know where it is, so maybe it is destroyed, maybe
it's in a
it still
depot somewhere.
exists.
Yeah.
Yes,
yeah.
But one day or the other,
Might be, yeah.
people or things pop up. They will be there.
A line in the 1933 Allstadt article said that Toni Ebel had a nude painting of Charlotte in the Nollendorfstrasse apartment. I wonder if this is the washed out and faded, perhaps even scrubbed out painting that looks like a nude on the back of the painting of the washerwoman held at the Stadtmuseum. I visited this work and a beautiful landscape early this year. These were the first Ebel paintings I ever viewed at a depository, and it was an extremely special moment for me. Julia Nagel welcomed me and was gracious enough to spend time and talk about the paintings with me. In the summer, Julia Nagel also welcomed Raymond and I to visit one of Toni Ebel's last self-portraits that she made in 1959 at the Stadtmuseum Holdings at the Ephraim Palace, where it is being restored expertly before it goes to Chicago. The process will take months and has to be in a climatized box to add humidity and allow the work to fall flat.
Yes, it was very, very nice. Yeah, we met there. It was you who introduced me to this curator or to this archivist.
Like the collections manager?
Yeah, manager.
For like this period of, I don't know, I think she does like 400 years she's in charge of paintings.
Yeah, to her, this Toni Ebel painting is just one of hundreds of paintings she's responsible for. But it was so nice to be there and to be shown it privately, so in face-to-face situation. These two women at the archive, they spent so much time with us and talking, answering to all our questions.
It's like an hour.
Yeah,
really.
Yeah, it was
very
really
generous.
Luxury. It was so, yeah, nice, yeah. And of course it was good. I've seen different paintings by Toni Ebel as an original, yeah. So I hadn't seen that one before, but of course it's very good to see whatever that is. There is possible. There is that is to be seen, yeah. And then okay, I had this idea of these three persons lying in the drawer. There were three paintings, yeah? And I think, yeah, it gives you personal food for your soul. It's something that makes you even more connected with your research, because things are not just there in a written form, or they are not just theoretical, but they are there, so we couldn't touch it.
The texture of the work itself is striking. The oil pastel is put on thickly and in layers. In the background, there's a lot of movement in red and dark blue, appearing much darker in the photographs than looking up close. Ebel puts her right hand on her hip and holds the brushes across her chest. She is strong and confident. A variation of colors appears on her face and hands, such as green, pink, and yellow. She used a wide range of colors and shades. You can tell she spent most of the time on her face, working and reworking the lines. Toni Ebel created many incredible self-portraits in her old age that give an understanding into how she viewed herself, and are colored pieces of trans-Berlin history. In this work, she wears a dark gray coat instead of a more familiar white artist smock. She is practical. If it gets dirty, then it will not appear on the coat. Another one of my favorite works by Ebel is her painting of a fjord, which Raymond Wolfert believes she copied from postcards.
Because it was very popular to have a Norwegian landscape or countryside hanging over your sofa in the German.
Touch with the times.
Yes, because the German Emperor Wilhelm, he traveled to Norway every year, and it was a saying then. Before 1915, a lot of German people, they were so fancy, they were so interested in Norway, they traveled to Norway in order to meet the German emperor there.
Oh, wow.
They wanted to be near him.
Like a celebrity
search. Yes, and they knew
so
he was on his ship, the Hohenzollern, in these fjords, and they traveled to these sites, and they wanted to be near the emperor.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
And maybe Toni just painted that painting from a postcard or the photograph.
Wow. Learning about Ebel's story and experiences exhibiting in many significant places in Berlin and Germany, such as the Märkisches Museum and 2 of the annual German art exhibitions in Dresden, made me curious about what it is like for exhibiting artists now. I discussed the art scene today with the Shy.
Ishai Garbash, she and her, or sie ihr, and I'm an art worker, sometimes called artist, but what I do takes a lot of work, and I should be paid or given equal resource to other workers, and that's a big sticking point. I should also be treated the same as other workers, because what I do is work. I should not be treated badly or exploited. And my interdisciplinary practice evolves around cultural specific inheritance of traumatic memories. But one of the things I'm working on right now is I'm making large-scale sculptures of vaginas made out of razor wire and barbed wire. This is because I want to expand the conversation about what it means to be a woman, because borders and prisons affect women disproportionately, particularly women of color, women with disabilities, and other women experiencing multiple marginalizations. And we need to stop having a monolithic conversation on something that is nuanced. And this is true for this and many other topics. And we have to have a much more comprehensive understanding and stop fucking over the most vulnerable. It's really unsafe in queer spaces here for trans women. And, you're excluded in every turn. Between Jewish and woman and being trans woman and not having money, you're pretty much excluded from everywhere. I don't even like the word trans because this is something that happened in my past. It's not who I am. I use it because cis people, but honestly, it's annoying. I'm a woman like any other woman with a diverse experience background. And, but the queer shows are about queerness. They can't be about anything else. And trans shows are about transness, and they can't be anything else. And this is so terrible. And there are even projects about trans people as a stepping stone in cis artists' career, like big solo show in the gay museum, so many of them. It's this exoticism that, okay, we can't do like travel photography to exoticize the other, so we force them with finance to do that to themselves, and then we're ethically clean. But it's the same problematic travel photography. It's the same titillation of the exoticism of the other. There is a reason why the art scene here is pale, male, and stale. It's a shame because we actually know a lot, especially with those of us that experience a lot of things that are outside of the norm, on the edges. We know so much. There is so much minority wisdom that the majority will never get to know because you didn't open it up for us. As long as you keep appropriating, taking a little bit, it will always be dead because you took it from where it's alive. And don't get me wrong, also trans, especially white trans people do it. Yeah, and a lot of the art is about the artist's lack of self-awareness. When you make art about the Holocaust and you want the viewer to feel bad or to feel something, a specific thing, you already failed in your job as a human being because consent is vital. And if you're trying to make somebody feel something, that is non-consensual. And you're ethically flawed and should really stop and check yourself before you wreck other people. And if you work with any traumatic topics, you have to be 1,000 times more sensitive. It's completely possible to do it. I know I do it a lot, but it's not obvious, and you're not a good person. There is no inherent, like ally status or good person status that you can adhere to. There is no such thing. And there is no, oh, but. There is no, no. You're always judged from the beginning. You start at zero every project, and you have to not fuck up every project. Mm-hmm. And a lot of the art about the Holocaust is about artists doing a career step and trying to make the audience feel a certain way. It's not trivial to make art. And it's not trivial to be a human being. You have to work at both. And if your environment or if your life affirms you in every way, you will not learn. Yes, it's possible for privileged people to be artists in theory, but being a successful artist is not the same as being a good artist. In art you have to be vulnerable. I don't mean taking off your clothes. I mean actually be vulnerable. The good and the bad, you have to be able to open up. Because art is not just done by a narrow part of you, it's done by all of you. And it's wonderful and terrible.
wish you could ask a trans person from the 1920s about, and what would you share about what being trans is like now?
This is a hard question because it's not separated from poverty for me.
Yeah.
It's not separated from Jewishness. It's not separated from disability. And it's, if I had a trans person from 1920, what I would like to do is, I don't know, tell stories, have fun together. I wouldn't have a question. I mean, it's more like, vibe with each other than anything else.
I love that. What are other ways to remember and celebrate Ebel's work? Well, the search continues to find more of her paintings. Hopefully, in the upcoming exhibit in the summer of 2025 in Prague, her story will be more widely known to Czech speakers, and people will recognize the treasures they have hanging on their walls or in their attics. You can also talk about her, write about her, share her story with your friends, go to the exhibit when it comes to Prague or Chicago, and sit in front of the painting and take a photo for us. Tell your friends about her story and why it's important to respect and honor trans people. Set a Google alert for Toni Ebel, and if you ever subscribe to any auction sites, search for Toni every so often. Toni's subjects vary dramatically. She also made reproductions of famous paintings. The man with the golden helmet is infamous for being forged. In 1985, the painting hanging in the Gemälde Gallery in Berlin was recognized as a forgery. We can imagine there are hundreds, if not thousands, of lost paintings of Toni Ebel's, and there are many still being discovered every year. It is unknown what happened to her estate after she died, or what happened to the work she did in exile. I asked Raymond about the experience organizing her first exhibition after her death at the Sonntagsclub, which started the revival in the interest in her work and life.
The response was a very nice one. So we were, the Sonntagsclub was very grateful for us to show reproductions of Toni Ebel's paintings in the bar, in the space where people have a beer and talk, and where groups meet. So this is a meeting place for the LGBT community who in some way has roots in the old GDR and who live in Prenzlauer Berg in East Berlin today. And they were fascinated, they were very encouraging once we took contact and said we would like to have an exhibition that is part on the arts and part on a documentary about Toni's and Charlotte's life. Yeah. So at the opening there were about, 30, 50 people maybe who came, and we even had a visitor from Frankfurt, Oder, because Toni Ebel had a brother, and this brother's granddaughter came. And she is an old lady now, about 75 years old. She remembered Toni Ebel from when she was a child. And she stayed in the same sleeping room sometimes when Toni was on a visit to her brother. So she could tell things about some paintings, some individual emotional things about Toni, and then even to women who are around 25, 30 years old, who were far relatives of this woman. They came and watched the exhibition later too. They didn't know anything about Toni, but they felt in some way very, very connected.
Oh, beautiful.
And through this exhibition, well, the talking went to Oranienburg and Templin and Leipzig, and then there was another relative from Toni who came here to the Magnus Hirschfeld Society, let's say half a year later, and he lives in Leipzig together with his family, and he had 3 original paintings by Toni Ebel with him, so we could take a photograph of them, but he's very proud to have them in his own flat.
And which ones are these? Or what paintings are these of?
They
Portraits?
They are landscapes. Oh. So they are houses and gardens and flowers and a street in a small German village. Well, I know it's Templin, it's the place where Toni painted these things, and it must have been like that when she was there in the summertime and visited her brother, she lived at his house, and then she had the easel and the canvas, and she put it up somewhere, yes, and painted outside. Wow. So people must have passed by and have seen, oh yes, there's a huge painter from Berlin painting our village.
That's really special too.
It's very, very special. Yeah. So the response was very positive and encouraging, and the personal implications were very nice because we got in contact with a lot of people then.
Did you share that story? I remember you shared with when we were at the Ephraim Palace. You said about the wigs. How was it? The granddaughter or her great niece? Or
yes,
something?
It was this woman. I'm sorry, I don't remember the name right now because when I speak English, my German remembrance center is knocked off.
Yeah,
so
I understand.
I don't know the names, but. She remembered, and when she was, so it was the granddaughter of Toni Ebel's brother, the woman who lives in Frankfurt Oder. She said when they went to bed in the evening hours, and she was a little girl and she wanted to sleep, and then Toni took off her wig. Yeah, so that's why, or thus, we found out that on these paintings, self-portraits, where Toni, has very white hair, so it was not her own hair, it was artificial hair. Yeah. But of course that's not that important, but sometimes you learn something from behind the paintings that's not the most important information, but it knits you nearer to...
gives life to the story.
Yes. Yeah. You feel connected because you see or you know so much more than is to be seen on these paintings. Yeah.
Makes it special.
Yes.
Definitely.
Yes. And this painting, well, this happened, there was a man who wrote an email to me sometime after we had the exhibition about Toni Ebel at the Sonntagsclub, and then he was very short and he just wrote, "Hi, I've got a Toni Ebel painting." Nothing more.
That's it?
Yeah, that's it. And I thought, well, what do you mean? Yes, and then I wrote back to him, and then he said, "Yes, I found it." When did you find it? Yeah, long ago. Yeah. And then, well, of course, it was so difficult to have a dialogue with him. But then he told that he, one day about 12, 20 years ago, 15 years ago, I don't know, he drove around with his car in eastern Berlin and in the outskirts of Berlin. And then there was a container with old clothes. And there were different things standing beneath the container. And he got curious, he stopped his car, and he found that painting. And since it had a signature, here it is. This is on the first side, and this is on the back side.
It's like a double.
Yeah, it's a double, and it's a 19 degrees. Yes, like this. So, and since the name of Toni Ebel is written there, he thought it must be something valuable, it must be something special. And then for some reason he found out about our exhibition and he made contact with me. And then I said, well, I would like to have that painting. Do you offer it? Do you sell it? Yeah. Yes, he said. Well, okay, we make an appointment. And I think it was November or it was February, maybe. It was cold here in Berlin. And he said, we meet on the River Spree. And I thought, well, on the River Spree?
On the river.
Yes. And he said, well, you know, at the station Friedrichstrasse, there is a dock, and you wait there, and I'll come there. And I waited there, and I looked down one side of the river. I didn't see anything. It was a bit misty. And then a huge boat coming from the other
I describe
side.
this painting. I arrive at Das Minsk in Potsdam for the Soft Power exhibit to see something from Toni Ebel on suggestion of Raymond Wolfer and Dr. Emily Evans.
At Das Minsk Kunsthaus in Potsdam. Finally.
The walk to the museum is a steep hill through a construction zone, and I struggle to push my rollerator, but I am motivated by the goal of sitting in a cold room on a hot day in front of one of my favorite paintings. Once inside, it is quiet, and there's a light blue-green carpet on the front area where you can buy tickets. I buy a €10 ticket begrudgingly and then head down to the lockers. Usually there are people there who can help me figure out if I'm allowed to take my rollerator with me during the exhibition or if I should rent a wheelchair, but no one is there. I go to the second floor. I turn the corner and I see the pieces that I wanted. I looked at the painting by Toni Ebel that is displayed, and I laughed a little because in June of 2023, I was at the Magnus Hirschfeld Gesellschaft, and Raymond Wolfer brought the exact same piece out to show us. I think I may have even touched it and held it. And now it is behind plexiglass, carefully screwed in and attached to the wall so that you can see both sides. At periods of her life, she had little access to painting materials, and so she must have used this back of the board as well to make a self-portrait. Or maybe it was a painting that was cut up already. Which came first, we don't really know. In this lighting, it's hard to even see it very clearly, but it does look like she used the same color palette for each side of the painting, so it makes me think, was she actually making this work at the same time, flipping it back and forth? Or did she do a sketch of a man on one side and decide to draw herself on the other? The drawing of the man is the drawing that is horizontal. On the 30.5 by 25 centimeter oil painting on wood, this figure is wearing a green-blue collared shirt and a huge shirt underneath that takes up the lower left half of the painting. They are looking down at the viewer, facing at a 3/4 of an angle, so that his two eyes and nose and mouth are visible, but only one ear. The shirt is not visible a little before the first button. The brown hair is swooped to the side and it's shiny on top. The face has blotches of red and freckles, but the paint has also flaked away, revealing bits of darker board underneath. The figure looks like they are about to cry, or they are reading something. The background is indistinguishable, inside of some room, probably sitting in some chair. A pink/orange post is about in the right half of the painting. There's no visible signature on the lower left where she usually signs. But then, on the front side, the self-portrait in vertical. The side of the self-portrait is really breathtaking. I pull up my rollerator to the piece so I can sit down and take a good look. Mostly the back of her head and her neck and the side of her face. The clear and strong outline of her nose is the prominent feature of the piece. The background is white/gray and at its brightest around her nose, giving a halo effect. You can see the brush strokes going back and forth, forming an inverted C around the tip of her nostrils. On the bridge of her nose rest her spectacles, round and tucked into her gray fluffy hair above her ears. Her eyelashes are dark, contrasting the gray of her glasses lenses. Ebel is looking out at someone on her right side, or staring very pointedly. Most of her face is dark in shadow, with some highlights on the back of her neck, nostrils, and side of her eye. Her lips are barely visible, outlined under her nose. Her beautiful blue shirt or coat takes up the majority of the canvas. Her shoulders and back are in the foreground. Textured strokes of blue, yellow, green, light blue, and some spots of white form a collared shirt that drapes around her back. On her head looks like a nimbostratus cloud that is about to rain. Shadows create depth in her curls, and her white and light gray wisps on the top break the boundaries of the dark sienna background. Her hair tells a story, moving with trained care. Above her ear and glasses sits a simple black hair clip, keeping her hair out of her face so that she can do her art. As I look up and down again, I keep getting drawn in by the dark blues and grays and browns of her glasses, nostrils, and the highlights of her nose, neck, and hair. She can capture the way that her gray hair looks like it is glistening in the light. The mood of this painting is strong. Ebel is saying, "You can talk to my back. You can see this part of me that I don't usually have shown. I'm not afraid of you." I don't see it as a turning away, but as a celebration of vulnerability and beauty and the elements of things that are less celebrated. She is saying, "Look at my beautiful back, my straggly hairs, my big nose, my glasses, my ear, and I guess the other parts of me, but don't go guessing too much because I may surprise you." The piece is in a frame of light cardboard with some watermarks, and her signature is in the bottom left in small black lettering. Her T is lowercase and her E is uppercase. I have to stop myself from saying in the middle of the exhibition, "Look here at this painting that Toni did, the most incredible, although perhaps smallest piece in the entire exhibit." But it's against the wall, not in any direct spotlights. It's easily skipped, not appearing in the audio guide either. It is my hope that in the future, her work is shown more in the spotlight, in the audio guides, and for more people to learn and see her work and instantly recognize her style, her signature brushwork, and incredible self-portraits. And so where does this leave us? With a lot of work to do. Toni Ebel is one of very, very few trans people in collections and archives of art museums in the world, and the start of her recognition in the past few years is just the beginning. There are so many incredible transgender and gender nonconforming artists in the world today, but it is often not a safe and welcoming place for us. In many places, we still have to go into exile, we still have to fight tooth and nail to get a chance at healthcare we deserve, and compassionate representation of us in the media is often hard to come by. And so we must ask ourselves, what is to be done? How do we survive and attempt to thrive in harsh and oppressive environments? We can look to the not-so-distant past and find some ideas, some clues for a path forward that is infused with mutual aid, community care, and redistribution of wealth. People before us looked out for their lovers and friends and strangers with big hearts and dreams for a better tomorrow, and it is crucial that we do the same now. Toni Ebel worked and painted for world peace, and to honor her legacy, we must continue that work together. Thank you so much to everyone who helped with this project and to the guest experts who decided to take time out of their days to speak with me. You can find more information about everyone I spoke with and their work in the show notes. The full bibliography with sources and links can be found on the show website, www.passingthepaintbrush.wordpress.com. The current artists we are exploring this season are Lotte Laserstein, Gertrude Zandman, and Toni Ebel, 3 incredible painters who survived the Shoah. This is a project hosted by Spinnboden Lesbian Archive and funded by Demokratie in der Mitte's Aktionsfund. Follow Friends of Dora on Instagram for further updates on upcoming episodes and workshops. I use the following music and sounds in this episode: Played by Ear, Meaningless Rich World by Jengwa from Free Music Archive, licensed under a CC BY 4.0 license. One Jazz by Holitsna CCO from Free Music Archive, licensed under Creative Commons 0. 2 Jazz by Holitsna from Free Music Archive, licensed under Creative Commons 0. Gazing by Andy G. Cohen from the Free Music Archive, licensed under Creative Commons BY 4.0. This episode featured the following incredible music by Tzipporah: Taffy Sunset from the album Tales of the Diaspora, used with permission from the artist. You can buy Tzipporah's amazing music on Bandcamp, link in the show notes. This episode also featured the song The Gallery by Rae du Soleil, used with permission from the artist. You can find Rae's music on SoundCloud, link in the show notes. If you want to tell your friends about this podcast or rate it on whatever platform you are listening from, that would be a free way to really help share this project with those who would be interested but do not know of it yet. This episode is dedicated to the memory of Dr. Jens Dobler, a wonderful person who always greeted me with kindness at the archive and whose work and research I relied upon when learning about queer bars and clubs before the Shoah and the May 10th book burnings. May his memory be a blessing. This final documentary of the series was written, produced, and mixed by me, Hani, with technical advising by Rocket Loam. Thank you for listening, and stay creative.